Ooh la la, pretty. Not so pretty. Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. Now, one of the things that really kind of confused me when I first got into hand tools is I've been using this plane for a while, and it really doesn't feel that much different than it felt before, I think. And I don't know, is it sharp or should I need to sharpen it? How often do you need to sharpen it? How do you know what it feels like? And the same thing goes for, chisels and saws. How do you know when they're dull? How do you know when to work through it? And honestly, that's something that comes with experience. The more you work with them, the more you know that really feels dull. And it's something your hand knows. That saw just isn't cutting well, and it's something you'll grow with over time. You'll realize what sharp feels like and what dull feels like. But until you get there, there's a few tricks that you can do. So I want to look at saws, chisels, and planes, a few things that will tell you, yeah, that's kind of dull, let's go sharpen it up. So first up, let's look at chisels. Now, there's a bunch of different ways you can tell if chisels are sharp, and if you've followed my channel, you know that I like shaving hair, and a good sharp chisel will shave every single hair it touches on the first pass. A dull chisel will miss a few hairs. A really dull chisel won't be able to shave hairs at all. So that's one of the things I like to test. But when you're actually working in the wood, another thing you can actually test is how it works on the wood itself. A dull chisel will compress the grain rather than cutting it, whereas a sharp chisel will slice through the grain. So I want to get a close-up on this and show you what it looks like. Now first, I'm going to use a chisel that I know is dull, and I'm going to set it back a little ways. Now this is pine. Pine is a good one for testing because if your chisel isn't sharp, it will still cut it, but it will crush the fibers. So let's see what this looks like. A few good taps, but as you clear those away, you'll notice that it's crushing the fibers here. In this ring here, this piece has fallen down as opposed to being sliced. Whereas if I use a chisel that I know is sharp, I'll do it right beside. The exact same. Number one, it slides through a lot easier. But number two, when I pull it out, you're not going to notice that crushing as much. You can see how this leaves all these gaps up in here, it's crushed. Whereas this, it's sliding through and cutting it. Now with pine, eventually it's going to crush a little bit, but not nearly as much as it did over on this side over here. And that's one of the indications of a sharp and a dull chisel. Now, most people are going to think that this is sharp. It feels fairly sharp. It's probably going to cut some hairs even. Yeah, it's cutting some hairs, but it's not cutting all the hairs. And so that's the slight difference between, I'm going to take this back to the stone, and so sharp it cuts every hair it touches. That little bit of crushing difference. That's one thing to keep in mind, that if it's doing that, you're probably right on the edge. Let's go sharpen it now. The duller it gets, the more it's going to crush and the more this will become obvious. Now for a saw, it's kind of a different matter because you're not always going to see the crushing grain. A dull saw will still cut. It may not cut beautifully and it may take you more time, but a dull saw will still cut. The problem is, how do you know when it is dull or not? I mean, really, you're not going to be able to see too much of a difference between this piece of grain and this piece of grain that was cut with a dull saw down here. Yeah, the dull saw looks a little bit more fuzzy, but oh well, they both cut, they both give a fairly decent work. One thing I like to do is actually feel the middle portion of the saw, where you're going to be using it the most. And you'll feel that it will grab the skin on your finger if it's sharp. Now, one of the other things is back here, this area, you rarely use these teeth. They just don't get used that much. Yes, you should be running all the way through, but most people are going to stop right here, and those last couple teeth aren't going to be used. Whereas if you feel those, you're going to feel that those really grab my finger. Nah, these don't grab it quite as much. So that's going to tell me these are kind of sharp, but I could go back and sharpen these. They're not quite as sharp as they are back here. And so being able to check between what you use all the time and what you don't use that much will give you a better idea of what is sharp and what is not sharp. The other thing you're going to notice is this particular saw is very dull, is that as I'm cutting, a dull saw just, it feels wrong. And then again, that's something you're going to have to learn over time, but a dull saw feels like it's sliding over the wood as opposed to sinking into the wood. With a sharp saw, you're going to feel every tooth catching. With a dull saw, you're just going to feel like it's not cutting anything, like you're sliding over marble. It just doesn't, it has a very fluid slide as opposed to a cutting feeling. I know it's kind of hard to explain, but you'll feel that eventually over time. Now the last thing is a plane. Now this plane is fairly dull. I probably should have sharpened it a little while ago, but I kind of left it out. And one of the things I'm going to notice is that I have to put more force behind this to get through this pine. My chips, my curls, are going to be kind of ragged, and you'll see tear out on the inside. Now part of that is I have this set a little bit deeper. When you first get started with a hand plane, you're going to feel that. Sometimes it'll feel like it touches here and it skips, and it touches here and it skips, and it touches here and it skips as it's going along. One of the tendencies of someone who's newer in it is they're going to want to say, ooh, I should actually make this a deeper cut. When one of the best things to do is actually to retract it and give yourself a lighter cut. If it won't cut at all when it's light, then you know it's dull. Or if it's a lot of work, it's dull. Whereas if it's sharp, you should be getting curls. The saw should slide through it evenly. You shouldn't have much force behind it at all. And it should slide through the wood. And you'll get these curls that are really nice and smooth edges. You don't see tear out inside. And when you back it down to a very fine cut, you're still getting a nice cut. It's not skipping, it's not bouncing. And you know that that then is a fairly well sharpened plane. Again, that's something you're going to have to learn over time. You have to learn what does a hard cut feel like. And the harder your wood gets, the easier it will become to notice. If you're working with something oak or hickory or maple, a dull plane really feels dull. It's something that stops and grabs and doesn't want to work through the wood. Whereas a sharp plane will slide through maple just like it's pine, and you can get these really nice curl cuts. That's just a piece of Douglas fir, but it's a good way to show what is dull and what is sharp. So there you go. A few quick videos to let you know, how do you know when it is really sharp, when it's kind of dull, or when it's really dull and needs to be done. You're going to learn it over time. The more you work with the tools, the more you get to know them, and that's really the best method to figure it out. But there are a few things that you can know, a few things you're looking for. If the tool just isn't performing the way you expect it, it's probably time to go back and sharpen it. And that's usually the very first thing I tell anyone is, go back and sharpen it. Get it to the point where it's going to shave a hair on your arm every single time and not miss anything. And that will give you a really nice, clean edge on everything you work on. So I hope you like this. I would love to hear your ideas. Is there any particular trick or tip you use to know, is your tool sharp? Is the tool you're working with needing to go back to the stone? I don't know. I'd love to hear that. I do want to say thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You guys really are the reason why I can keep putting out videos like this. If you'd like to help out with that or just find out more about it, you can do so right down here. Also, if you'd like to subscribe and see some behind the scenes footage, you can do that as well. That's about it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day.